Lakbir was born and raised in a small village in Punjab, India, within a deeply traditional family. Growing up, she was known for her free-spirited nature and had dreams of breaking away from conventional expectations. She loved learning, had a passion for creativity, and often imagined a life filled with adventure and independence. However, like many young women in her community, her path was largely decided by her family's priorities and cultural values. As she reached adulthood, Lakbir's family arranged her marriage to Omkar Singh, a financially stable man who had settled in London. For her family, having a son-in-law living abroad, especially in a prominent city like London, was a status symbol and a chance at a better future. They believed that a marriage to a man living overseas would elevate their own standing and bring Lakbir a comfortable, respectable life. Though Lakbir had her doubts, she was hesitant to refuse and ultimately gave in to her family's wishes, resigning herself to the traditional path set before her. After the wedding, Lakbir left her homeland behind and moved to London with Omkar, determined to make the most of this new chapter. Though she struggled with mixed feelings, she harbored hope that her life in London might hold some of the excitement and freedom she had once dreamed of. London presented a massive cultural shift for Lakbir. The fast-paced, diverse environment was unlike anything she had experienced before, and although she was fascinated by the city's energy, she felt lost and isolated. Omkar was kind, but busy with his work, often leaving her to navigate this unfamiliar world on her own. Over the years, the couple established a routine. They bought a modest home in South London and welcomed 3 children into their family. Lakbir focused on raising her children and creating a comfortable home, gradually adapting to the rhythm of life in London. She learned to navigate the city, manage household responsibilities, and care for her children with the same dedication she had once applied to her dreams. Yet, underneath the surface, Lakbir felt a lingering emptiness. The responsibilities of family life kept her busy, but she occasionally found herself reflecting on what might have been if she had pursued her passions. She missed the sense of freedom and purpose she once felt, and wondered if she had sacrificed too much in her commitment to family and tradition. Then came a turning point in her life that would test her strength like never before. Omkar was diagnosed with cancer. His illness was severe and required prolonged intensive treatment. As Omkar's health declined, Lakbir shouldered an increasing burden, managing both the household and the financial stress that mounted with each hospital visit. The challenges became overwhelming, but she remained devoted, caring for Omkar and their children while navigating the harsh realities of illness. Lakbir's life in London was an exhausting blend of responsibility and quiet resignation. With Omkar's health deteriorating due to cancer and the pressures of managing a household on her own, Lakbir began to feel emotionally drained and isolated. She had little time for herself, often giving everything to Omkar and their 3 children, leaving her own emotional needs unaddressed. It was in this period of loneliness and vulnerability that she met Lakvinder Chima, known as Lucky. Lucky was a young man in his early 20s who had recently moved to London from Punjab in search of better opportunities. He was full of ambition and energy, hoping to carve out a name for himself in a city known for its promises of success. Luck seemed to be on his side, and he quickly found work in a local shop. Eventually, Lakbir decided to rent a portion of her house to tenants, including Lucky. She had met him briefly before he moved in, and was impressed by his charm, warmth, and respectful demeanor. In the beginning, their relationship was simply that of landlord and tenant, but as time passed, Lucky's presence in the house became more frequent and unavoidable. With Omkar in and out of the hospital and consumed with his own health struggles, Lakbir found solace in Lucky's company. He had a cheerful and youthful disposition, something she hadn't encountered in years. In him, she saw a reflection of her younger self, full of potential and desire to break free from societal constraints. Lucky would often talk to her about his dreams, the challenges he faced in a foreign land, and his desire to succeed. Slowly, they developed a deeper bond. Lockbeer began to confide in Lucky about her frustrations with her marriage, the limitations imposed by her role as a wife and mother, and the loneliness that consumed her. Lucky was a good listener, offering emotional support and comforting her during difficult times. His attentiveness made Lockbeer feel valued in a way she hadn't felt in years. In return, she cared for him in a maternal yet increasingly emotional way. Over time, this emotional connection started to evolve into something more intimate, though neither of them acknowledged it openly. As the bond between Lockbeer and Lucky grew, so did their feelings for each other. Their secret affair began quietly, with stolen moments of intimacy behind closed doors. It was as if the weight of her responsibilities and unfulfilled desires made the affair seem like the only way Lockbeer could reclaim a sense of freedom, excitement, and passion. She had been married to Omkar for years, but the marriage had long since lost its spark. Omkar, weakened by his illness, had grown distant, and their relationship had shifted into a routine devoid of the affection they once shared. Lockbeer loved her children dearly, but in the quiet spaces between their school runs, meals, and hospital visits, she began to wonder what it would be like to truly live for herself, to experience life with someone who made her feel seen and cherished. Though she knew their affair was reckless, Lockbeer couldn't help but feel alive whenever she was with Lucky. The secrecy of it made it all the more thrilling, even though she constantly battled guilt. She would make excuses to visit Lucky, preparing his favorite meals, spending time talking and making sure Omkar never suspected anything. In those moments, Lockbeer felt like a different woman, one who had escaped the confines of her past and was free to experience life without judgment. However, this secret love came with its own set of complications. Lockbeer was unable to reconcile the two sides of her life. She loved her children, but her emotional connection with Lucky was undeniable. She knew that if anyone found out about their relationship, it would bring ruin upon her family, bring disgrace to her name, and possibly destroy everything she had worked for. Despite the challenges, Lockbeer and Lucky's relationship continued, albeit under a shroud of secrecy. There were moments of happiness, but the weight of deception was always lurking beneath the surface. Lockbeer's world had been in turmoil for some time, but the breaking point came when she could no longer deny the overwhelming emotional and psychological strain she was under. For years, she had balanced the role of wife, mother, and caretaker. Her devotion to Omkar, despite his declining health due to cancer, had been unwavering, but it had taken a toll on her. Their once loving marriage had become a hollow routine of hospital visits, medications, and the quiet despair of watching her husband wither away. Omkar, physically frail and mentally consumed by his illness, was no longer the man she had married. His emotional distance made her feel even more isolated. At the same time, her growing attachment to Lucky became a source of confusion and turmoil. When Lockbeer first met him, he had been a source of brightness in her otherwise monotonous life. Lucky, young, energetic, and full of dreams, offered her a glimpse of the excitement she longed for but could never have. Their emotional bond, built on conversations about life, love, and future aspirations, became increasingly complex. Lucky listened to her woes, shared her hopes, and subtly began to make her feel special again. His charm was magnetic, and his youthful zest for life awakened something within her that had long been dormant. But as the months passed, Lockbeer's emotional attachment to him deepened. She began to rely on him more, seeking his company to escape the weight of her responsibilities. Their secret moments together were a bittersweet escape from her chaotic life, a life where her desires and her duties were constantly at odds. She knew that what they had was an affair, an illicit bond that threatened everything she had built with Omkar. But the more she tried to fight it, the stronger her feelings for Lucky became. In the depths of her heart, Lockbeard knew that this relationship with Lucky was unsustainable. She had to face the reality that she could never have him fully to herself. Lucky was young and had his own dreams, and he would inevitably want to marry someone from his own culture, someone with whom he could build a future. Lockbeard couldn't accept that. The thought of losing him, of him marrying another woman, filled her with dread. She clung to the hope that their bond was special and irreplaceable. The breaking point came when Lucky revealed that he had become engaged to Gurjit Kaur, a woman from his family's village in India. His family had arranged for him to marry her, and after months of pressure, he finally agreed. He still cared for Lockbeard, but he had come to realize that his future lay elsewhere. When Lockbeard learned of this, it shattered her. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung, but the stark reminder that she was nothing more than a temporary diversion for Lucky, someone to pass the time with while he built the life he truly wanted. In a desperate attempt to change his mind, Lockbeard tried to convince Lucky that they could have a future together. She told him that they could escape, leave everything behind, and build a life based on love and passion. But Lucky, though kind and understanding, remained firm in his decision. His relationship with his family and his cultural obligations were too strong to break, and he couldn't continue living a lie with Lockbeard. Unable to bear the thought of him marrying another woman, Lockbeard's jealousy consumed her. She couldn't stand the idea of him being happy with someone else, especially knowing how much she had sacrificed for their relationship. Her emotions spiraled out of control, and a dark, obsessive desire took root. She would make sure that if she couldn't have him, no one else could. Lockbeard's fixation on Lucky's engagement became the trigger for a tragic, irreversible course of action. She believed that if she couldn't have him, his death would prevent him from marrying Gurjit, thereby keeping him for herself. She knew that this would be a final, irreversible act, but in her fractured mind she rationalized it as the only way to keep him from leaving her. It wasn't the first time Lockbeard had entertained such dark thoughts. She had always been emotionally volatile, but now desperation clouded her judgment. She began to plan the perfect murder, a way to remove Lucky from her life forever. The idea was to kill him slowly, in a way that wouldn't be immediately suspicious. Poisoning seemed to be the perfect option, as it would appear to be a natural illness or a simple case of food poisoning. Lockbeard carefully obtained a toxic substance from a contact in India, Riken, a highly potent poison that could be derived from castor beans. Riken was almost undetectable in small doses and could cause a slow and painful death. It was the perfect weapon for someone like Lockbeard, who wanted to ensure that the act appeared to be an unfortunate accident. On the night she planned to carry out the murder, Lockbeard invited Lucky to her home under the guise of celebrating his engagement and to have a final dinner together before his wedding. She prepared a meal with his favorite dishes, roast chicken, buttery naan, and a rich dessert. As she mixed the ingredients for his meal, Lockbeard carefully added the poison to the food, ensuring that Lucky would consume it unknowingly. When Lucky arrived for dinner, she greeted him with a warm smile and tried her best to act casual, as if everything was perfectly normal. He was oblivious to the danger that awaited him. The dinner was filled with small talk, laughter, and shared memories, but Lockbeard's mind was focused solely on the meal and the poison working its way into his system. After they ate, Lucky started to feel ill, complaining of nausea and stomach cramps. At first, Lockbeard dismissed it as a minor upset stomach, but soon, Lucky's condition worsened, and he collapsed to the floor, writhing in pain. His body started to convulse, and he could barely breathe. Panicked, Lockbeard called an ambulance, pretending to be concerned and frantic. By the time the paramedics arrived, Lucky had lost consciousness and was rushed to the hospital. Doctors initially suspected food poisoning, but the symptoms were severe and didn't match typical foodborne illnesses. It wasn't until further tests that the presence of ricin was discovered in his system. Though Lucky fought for his life, the damage caused by the poison was too severe. His organs began to fail and he was declared brain dead within hours of arriving at the hospital. Lockbear's life was spiraling out of control. The bitter reality of losing Lucky, the young man she had obsessed over for months, had pushed her to the brink of madness. After his death from the poisoned meal, Lockbear believed that no one would understand her torment, nor would anyone feel the depth of her emotions. Her obsessive love for him had turned into something darker and more dangerous, and it was this madness that fueled her desire to control his fate, even after death. But Lockbear's bitterness was not confined to just losing Lucky. Her irrational jealousy had also extended to Gurjeet, Lucky's fiancé. Lockbear's mind twisted the events so that she convinced herself that Gurjeet was the true cause of her suffering. If Gurjeet hadn't entered Lucky's life, if she hadn't been engaged to him, Lockbear reasoned that perhaps things could have been different. The rage and jealousy that consumed her were palpable. In Lockbear's deluded mind, she believed that by removing Gurjeet from the picture, she could at least regain some control over the situation. Despite knowing that Lucky was already dead, Lockbear fixated on the idea of removing Gurjeet from the equation. Perhaps, in her warped sense of reality, she could still exact some final revenge or reclaim some twisted form of justice. She couldn't bear the thought of Gurjeet finding peace and moving forward with her life. In Lockbear's eyes, it was as though the young woman represented everything she had lost, and as long as Gurjeet was alive, she would always be a reminder of Lockbear's own failure to keep Lucky. Lockbear's chance to carry out this new attempt came when she learned that Gurjeet, still reeling from the shock of Lucky's death, would be visiting her house to mourn and seek solace. Gurjeet had no idea that Lockbear had any further ill intentions. She believed that, in time, Lockbear would recover from the pain of losing Lucky, and that they could perhaps heal together. But Lockbear saw this as the perfect opportunity to finish what she had started. Lockbear invited Gurjeet to her home one evening, claiming she wanted to speak about the tragic events and find closure. This invitation, however, was nothing more than a ruse. Lockbear had carefully prepared another poison meal, one that would seal Gurjeet's fate. She had learned from her previous attempt with Lucky, and had been more methodical this time. She knew how to mask the poison in the food, so that it would be harder to detect. Her mind, consumed by an obsession that overpowered any remnants of rationality, believed that this would finally end her misery. Gurjeet, unaware of the danger, arrived at Lockbear's home with a sense of trepidation, but also a fragile hope for healing. Lockbear greeted her warmly, pretending to be kind and understanding, giving no hint that she had planned another attempt on Gurjeet's life. The meal she served was rich and aromatic, with Lockbear presenting dishes Gurjeet loved: pasta, rich curries, and a sweet dessert. Each dish was carefully prepared to mask the poison, and Lockbear's hands trembled with anticipation as she set the table. As the dinner progressed, Gurjeet ate without suspicion. However, it wasn't long before she began to feel nauseous. Her stomach churned with an intensity she hadn't felt before. She excused herself to the restroom, but the symptoms rapidly escalated. She returned to the dining room pale and sweaty, clutching her stomach. She told Lockbear she felt faint and dizzy, and Lockbear feigned concern, trying to suppress the satisfaction she felt inside. As Gurjeet collapsed onto the floor, clutching her stomach in agony, Lockbear was almost pleased with the outcome. Her plan was coming to fruition. But this time, things did not go according to plan. Unlike Lucky, Gurjeet had a stronger constitution. She managed to crawl to the phone and dial emergency services, gasping for air and barely able to speak. The paramedics arrived just in time and Gurjeet was rushed to the hospital, where doctors immediately recognized the symptoms of poisoning. While Lakbir acted concerned and tearful at the hospital, pretending to be devastated by Gurjeet's condition, she knew that her plan had failed. Gurjeet survived, but the emotional and psychological toll on her was immense. She was left physically weakened, but emotionally scarred, haunted by the knowledge that someone she trusted could try to kill her. The authorities were quick to investigate the poisoning of Gurjeet, particularly given that it followed the mysterious death of Lucky under nearly identical circumstances. At first, the doctors had assumed Gurjeet's condition was just a terrible coincidence, a case of food poisoning. However, when they found traces of ricin, the same deadly poison that had killed Lucky, their suspicions were immediately aroused. As part of standard procedure, the authorities examined the circumstances surrounding Lucky's sudden and fatal illness. They retraced his steps, analyzed the food he had consumed, and found the link between the two poisoning cases. They quickly realized that the poison used on Lucky and Gurjeet was identical: ricin, a highly toxic substance that could cause death through organ failure within hours. The police investigation uncovered a chilling pattern of behavior. Lakbir's connection to both victims began to take shape. They found multiple messages from Lucky and Lakbir on her phone, some of which contained confessions about their relationship, and others that raised questions about Lakbir's emotional instability and obsession with Lucky. One particular message from Lakbir to a close friend confessed her growing anger and jealousy toward Gurjeet, describing her as an obstacle in the way of a life that Lakbir believed she could have had with Lucky. The authorities also investigated Lakbir's past and her ties to India, where they discovered she had made a series of trips back and forth in the years leading up to the deaths. They found a record of her purchase of ricin through underground sources, someone with links to India's black market who had provided her with the poison. The trail of evidence became undeniable. Lakbir had been preparing to kill Lucky for months, and after his death, she had made another attempt on Gurjeet's life. Witnesses from the neighborhood recalled Lakbir's erratic behavior, her frequent visits to local markets, purchasing odd ingredients, and acting strangely around the time of both poisoning incidents. Friends and family noted her increasingly obsessive behavior toward Lucky and her almost manic fixation on preventing his marriage to Gurjeet. This all painted a picture of a woman whose mental state had deteriorated to the point of violence. The police arrested Lakbir after she was linked directly to the poisonings. She was charged with murder for the death of Lucky and attempted murder for poisoning Gurjeet. During her trial, Lakbir maintained her innocence, claiming that she had no idea the food was contaminated. She portrayed herself as a grieving wife, mourning the loss of her beloved husband and the devastation of losing Lucky, the man she had loved. However, the evidence against her was overwhelming. The court proceedings revealed the full extent of her obsession. The prosecution detailed how Lakbir had used her position as a wife and mother to manipulate the situation, using her trust with Lucky and Gurjeet to poison them. Expert testimony about ricin's effects and how it could only be obtained through careful planning solidified the case. The jury deliberated, and within hours, they returned with a guilty verdict. Lakbir was convicted of first-degree murder for Lucky's death and attempted murder for Gurjeet's poisoning. On April 14, 2010, she was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 25 years. The courtroom was filled with stunned silence as the judge delivered the sentence, the gravity of her crimes sinking in. Gurjeet, though physically healed, would carry the psychological scars of the ordeal with her for the rest of her life. The conviction brought a sense of closure, but the emotional toll of the tragedy remained. For Lakbir, her obsession had destroyed everything: her family, her sense of self, and ultimately her freedom. The case became a tragic reminder of how unchecked jealousy and obsession could drive a person to commit unspeakable acts of violence. Lockbeer's name became synonymous with betrayal and madness, and the story of her crimes would be remembered as one of the most tragic and chilling cases of obsession-driven violence.